Yeah, another video I think on the subject of religion being a mental disorder. Um, and so again, the context of this conversation again is the fact that I would almost argue that most mental disorders, most conditions of human psychology are not conditions of physical damage. I mean, most of the syndromes we have defined and scenarios that we qualify as a certain kind of decision or compulsive disorder or some sort of disorder aren't necessarily disorders of physically broken structure, but are conditions of bad conditioning. People have been conditioned poorly. And somebody even mentioned this in some other video unrelated, but made some comment about isn't like I used the analogy of the crack of the whip, in a slave analogy. And, he was sort of trying to catch me on the idea that, well, isn't that a conditioned response? And yes, it is. But it's a rational conditioning. So, we are conditioned sometimes very consistent with reality, and sometimes the conditioning is erroneous. So you could be having an event in school or something, and some teacher treats you badly, some old hag. Now you could associate old hag with the bad treatment, or you could associate her yellow hat with the bad treatment. Your brain will do that. Your brain does things like that. When it's conditioning you, it associates things that you don't realize it's associating. You don't consciously realize. Your brain makes the associations subconsciously, and sometimes it gets it right, and sometimes it gets it wrong. And if the experience is very traumatic, it might get it wrong in some kind of very bad way. Like, say you're a kid and you fall off a horse, and as you're on the ground, the first person that shows up does something that really hurts you, and they're wearing a black shirt. And so then you're afraid of referees for the rest of your life or something. So I'm just saying that's the kind of thing that can happen. The more traumatic the event, the more it becomes part of your conditioning, and the more possible it is for your subconscious to misidentify what caused the trauma. Because your subconscious isn't that smart. So you can have conditioning that is consistent with reality, and that you learn that fire's hot and that fire's dangerous, and you have a conditioned response to be cautious and careful and whoa, stand back a little. Some conditioning can be completely erroneous and have nothing to do with anything but the fact that the wrong person showed up at the wrong time at the wrong event, and your brain associated two things that aren't relevant, and now you're afraid of chicken feathers for no good reason. Something like that. I hate that I have to keep explaining shit all the time. I mean, it's not my job to educate you people, personally tutor you. But then again, I guess it is my job, because when I think about it, nobody else understands this stuff properly. When I think of how many psychology books I read that were so full of shit. Fuck. Anyway. So moving on to the real subject, going back, was how did we get here? Religion is a disorder. How did I get on the conditioning subject? That most mental disorders are conditioned disorders, where people's subconscious has associated things and created in them connections. You could say that most compulsive disorders are basically superstitions taken way out of control. They gain a notion of equity or fairness, and their brain thinks that, if I turn the switch off 20 times, I can make a deal with the universe that something won't happen to me. And it's a delusion. It's not a physical part of their brain that's broken, although it can create physical changes in their brain because it becomes an obsession. And so the obsession will be visible, but the obsession didn't cause the disease. The obsession wasn't caused by the brain. The obsession was caused by circumstances of conditioning, maturation, and these associations that take place. That's how serial killers are created. They're not born. So anyway, I mean, certainly some people can be born more likely to become one because they have certain mechanisms of brain function that don't work or don't work very well. Mechanisms like seeing something and then seeing themselves in that position, or different ways your brain automatically functions that their brain doesn't. So they'll not acquire something like compassion or empathy because their brain will become so self-focused and never be able to have any true imagination. But that's a whole other area of psychiatric discussion. So anyway, but this whole argument kind of hinges on this fact that there's a whole that class of syndrome of brain disorder. These are all disorders of psychology, all right, not physiology. Although they can create physiological reactions. I have a neurotic anxiety disorder based on conditioning and my maturation that created a association that wasn't completely incoherent to reality, but exaggerated a connection. And it just kept feeding on itself and validating itself through my experiences in life, and became so reinforced that now I have visceral reactions that I can't do much with, that again just doom me to failure. So they basically, the visceral reactions just reinforce the condition because they create the negative that wouldn't exist by itself, but exists now, always associated with the circumstance that my brain is associated with. And that's a syndrome. It's a reoccurring negative thing that is in a sense self-fueling. It amplifies, and that's how it gets out of control. So that is a disorder. Now the argument I'm making is that the fables of religion, or Santa Claus, or the Easter Rabbit, I think they're all equally dangerous. I think this whole notion of looking to imaginary characters as a source of comfort is a bad habit of conditioning in kids, and that it becomes a syndrome in adults. So I think it is a conditioned response, that people get conditioned into it. They get conditioned to look for God. Even when they recognize that the story their parents are telling them is silly, they still want there to be a story. They still need there to be a story, because they've been conditioned to look that way, to view things that way, to view things the overall shape that they need to fill is the same. They're just going to try to find something more rational to fill that space with. But their need to fill that space is the syndrome, is the disease they are infected with in youth. So parents don't have to be religious to create what I would call a delusional psychology, or a psychology subject to the syndrome of phantasmagoria. So yes, a non-religious kid could, not raised religious, could certainly be a phantasmagorical. But my argument would be he probably still has to be raised to be one. He still has to be infected with the need to have resolution in a fantasy character, in something bigger than this reality, because this reality sucks. And very few kids are going to be raised on reality, because everybody knows that would traumatize the fuck out of them, and they'd all be, cutting their throats at 13. If you told them the truth. if you fed them the truth and they had to play a game, they knew it was this catastrophically flawed. That the good will not get what they deserve, the evil will be rewarded, that there is no fairness and justice, and we as the human... I unfortunately lost the end of that video, which is really good. I was really on a roll. So anyway, we left off somewhere around, if you raise a kid in reality, they're not going to be convertible, would be my argument. Okay, they're not going to find there's no hope. You're not going to, like a Thunderfoot or something, or I'd even argue me, you'd never convert us to a religion. We would never accept anything without evidence. You'd have to have some sort of real evidence, because we would have the strict standard of the very standard we had in our life. We'd have to touch the bug and see what the bug does, and watch what the bug does, and analyze the bug's behavior. I mean, it's a thing in the world, and we would have to see it do something. So if you're going to claim there's a God or a force that's more intelligent, then we would have to ask it some questions. We'd have to have proof of its intelligence. It couldn't just show up and say, I'm intelligent. Believe me, because look, I'm a poofter, I'm a God, I'm a cloud. Well, even if you're a talking cloud, you're going to have to demonstrate to me that you somehow know what the fuck you're doing. But yeah, we would never be... We would never, it just wouldn't even occur in our logic. And I'm saying if the human race was raised without fables, without Hansel and Gretel and 3 bear stories and 3 pig stories, all these just lies, these metaphors that are intended to create circumstances that have nothing to do with reality. Even the Cat in the Hat, as much as I like Dr. Seuss, it's still full of magic. Alright, there's always the hero ending, always the happily ever after bullshit. These are just preposterous lies. And when people grow up expecting there to be a solution, yeah, then they're going to be broken, they're going to be dysfunctional logically in the future, because their bigotry, their desire, their want, their need for there to be some sort of, Prince Valiant bullshit is going to exist. They're going to keep thinking something will show up and fix it. And you can almost see that in the way the human race behaves. They don't panic. they don't ever respond to anything in any kind of disciplined manner. They don't do anything methodically and carefully. The recklessness and the sloppiness and the overreactions and the underreactions are just all over the place, because they have no conscious understanding that they're responsible. They keep thinking it's something else's fault. They keep wanting to say, if the system is broken, or if the system isn't, whatever the system's doing, is they'll just go along with it. It's the Borg, the DNA. It must have a plan. They'll even do that. Even though it has no brain, they'll just say the plan must be built into it. And you can see them do this, and when you push them, you'll eventually find that they want to go back to a god. They want to go back to an initiator. Something pushed the button. Something poked it into existence. Something deliberate. And it's there, and it's out there. And I'm saying that's the disease. That's the psychiatric syndrome that's perverted them. They are logically perverted. They can't see the truth. They can't accept the truth. They must conform reality. They must force the facts to fit into their mold of their psychology. And I'm saying that's a disease syndrome. That's a brokenness syndrome. Once you start destroying the continuity of logic, once you start saying I don't even have to obey the premises anymore, and once you become that unreasonable, where your standards of proof for one category of thing are this high, and then all of a sudden your standards go all the way to the basement when we're talking about origins. All of a sudden proof doesn't have to exist. You can just make up shit, multiverses and whatnot. People be just so easily accepting. All their skepticism somehow disappears because they want it to be true. And I'd say that that bias, that prejudice against, is an epistemic dysfunction, and it was caused by perversion in maturation. They have a conditioned disorder, and it can be called that. It can be called a disorder. It can be called a dysfunction. It can be called disease. Is a complicated word. Most people don't. Most syndromes of psychiatry and psychology aren't called diseases. So, again, do I have to go with that strict category? Religion is a disease of the mind? Of the mind, maybe. Of the brain, but I still say, I guess I would almost say it is in its symptoms. Its symptoms define it as a disease because they are catastrophic to what would be competent brain function. They'll turn a competent brain into an incompetent brain. They'll turn a brain that can work in so many other categories, apply logic in so many other categories, and it can't apply logic in this category. The most important category there is, reality, the definition of origin, meaning, purpose. That category, logic can't be applied because they personally can't accept the truth. And they can't do it because they have a conditioned order inside their brain that says no. Anyway, like I said, I did better in the walk, but you get what you get. Sloppy seconds, whatever, sloppy afterward thing. I'm tired now. So, yeah, this is what you get. Still a good video, I think. I mean, the subject of conditioning is probably the most under-discussed thing there is. It's such a huge factor in creating what becomes our sensibilities. And most of this conditioning happens to our subconscious, and it happens early in our lives. And that really should be interesting to people, because this is a critical element of our identity, and people aren't paying much attention to it. We really are being raised by bullshit, and there shouldn't be much surprise how full of shit adults become. I'm talking to you. Yeah, I'm looking at you too. Evil eye? You believe in that? Yeah. You believe in astrology? Yeah. Do you? Numerology? Yeah, you're all desperate. Desperate to find a God.